Gig Gab, episode 422 for Monday, March 25th, International Waffle Day 2024. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians here on International Waffle Day in Durham, New Hampshire. I am Dave Hamilton, and my guest today is someone who truly I have just met, but we've talked about on the show a few times in the past. Dallas Taylor from the 20,000 Hertz podcast, as well as Defacto Sound. Dallas, thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Thank you for having me. I love this. I love talking about nerdy audio things.
That's outstanding. Same. Yeah. As I was prepping for this, I thought, for 9 years on this show, 19 years on the other show that I do, Mac Geek Gab, I have been the default audio nerd here. And now today, I think I am with someone who is but almost certainly a bigger audio nerd than me, and I love it. So
I don't know about that, but I'm very flattered.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. So tell people about your podcast, 20,000 Hertz and Defacto Sound. The two are very related in a sense, and also separate, but yeah.
So I started my career as a sound designer for television, and I worked in LA for Fox and G4 at NBC, and then later worked for the Discovery Channel and all of their networks. After doing post-audio in those circles, I started my own company, Defacto Sound.
Yep.
And I did that, 14 years ago. And from that point, still work with all of the people that I've worked with prior to starting the company. And my company mainly does commercials, like big sneaker spots or car spots. Or,
okay. Yep.
Trailers for Netflix and HBO and documentaries, things like that.
Yeah.
But 8 years ago, we started a passion project in the studio. Basically, all of the unbilled time that we had on the studio. I started a podcast and wanted to do a podcast about sound. And so that's 20,000 Hertz. And here we are 8 years later, and I'm running two companies.
So 20,000 Hertz is an interesting show. Interesting to me anyway. You dig into the backstory essentially of different sounds all across the spectrum.
Yeah, the tagline is the stories behind the world's most recognizable and interesting sounds. And so that can cover a lot. And the reason I put that second part in most interesting sounds was to give me the leeway to not only cover famous sounds like the Netflix to dumb or the Amen break or something that's very specific in what that story is, but it also gave me the ability to go into like neuroscience and health when it comes to sound. And so every show is super highly crafted and produced, and it takes us about 300 hours to make, and we have our whole team on it. And it's very meticulous, and it's kind of like a mix between, in my mind, a mix between Radiolab, This American Life, and 99% Invisible, but if every single story was about sound.
Amazing. Okay, so 300 hours to produce. I definitely, folks, we are going to get nerdy about audio today, and if that's not your thing, listen if you like. It might be, or feel free to move on to the next episode. It's okay. I don't take it personally, and I'm sure Dallas doesn't either. But and we're going to get a little nerdy about podcasting too, because when I think we both understand that sound quality for our listeners is an important factor in delivering a podcast to our listeners. It's an important factor in retaining listeners. I've always said if the content is exceptional, listeners will occasionally forgive terrible sound, but otherwise, you can't exhaust your listeners' ears by making them work too hard to listen to your show.
I take it a step further, and I think it's a respect for the listeners.
Yeah.
Just like it would be a respect to shoot things well. And for people who are listening in audio only, not only in this podcast here, as that there's a respect for the listener based off of making sure that every nuance of the way that we sing our notes and our voice is clear for you to be able to interpret. But both of us, if you were seeing us in visuals right now, also have that level of respect for anybody who sees us, that we both have lit, well, beautifully like background studios happening too. So, and it's all rooted in a respect for anyone who chooses to spend this much time listening to us communicate what we love.
I love that you put it that way. It truly is. I've never said that. I've never articulated it that way, but I will now, because it absolutely reflects what the reason that I go through all the craziness that I go through with this show. I told you, as I do most of our guests on any shows that I have, that I'm a lazy podcaster. That's not really true.
Mm-mm.
I can
tell you're not lazy.
Well, but I am someone who is time crunched. So when we started our first podcast 19 years ago, I was running 3 businesses. It grew out of a website called the Mac Observer, which we started and have since sold. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
That's you. Well,
that's me.
Amazing. Now I don't want to derail this entire thing, but
derail away.
Fanboydom peaked.
Oh, there you go. So I'm stoked. That's
literally just at Apple. That's for another story. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. But we might talk about some Apple software.
Podcast.
Yeah, it does. So we'd started the Mac Observer 26 years ago or something. 19 years ago, podcasting was becoming a thing. An advisor, consultant friend said, "Hey, you guys should do podcasts as part of Mac Observer," and I knew he was right. Like with most things, I decided I would start the project and then hand it off to somebody else. I failed at the second part, but and I'm glad about that. There's a whole story about Steve Jobs promoting our show when it first launched, and then I wound up being the host. Yeah, same. Yeah, and but I'll save that for another time. And so I had, so we had Mac Observer. I had this company, which I still have, called Backbeat Media, which represents the sponsorship interests of, at the time, websites, now a bunch of podcasts, and another business that was going too. And of course, I had a family that was growing. And so I knew, and I know myself, if I let myself be a perfectionist, I will never stop. Mm-hmm. And I also knew that if I wanted a podcast to be successful, it needed to come out on time every week. Whatever time I decided, I needed to be consistent for my listeners. Again, back to respecting the audience.
Deadlines are very important in the creative process. That's
they
my entire life.
It's motivators, yes. So I knew that if I allowed myself days to do editing and post-production, the show would never come out on time because I would wind up getting derailed by the other priorities that I had. So I gave myself a 15-minute timer from the time the red light goes off to when the episode is published. I mainly stick to that still to this day. I have allowed the post-production process to get a little more involved, but it's an hour now. It very much, the work is done ahead of time, but I knew that meant I had to mix the show live because I can't take a podcast that's an hour or even a half hour and mix it in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I need to do it while we're doing the show. And so years ago, that piece of software was Audio Hijack Pro, actually is what it was called, a piece of software for the Mac. I have since moved, and believe it or not, this is the third episode of yet another change to my workflow. Back in 2020, I moved to using all digital. I made Logic my mixer as opposed to having an external outboard mixer. So I made Logic my mixer, and that worked great until Apple started screwing up aggregate audio devices in recent versions of macOS.
Audio devices. That string of words just triggers me.
Well, they used to work just fine, Dallas, and now they don't anymore. Especially for real-time stuff, which I don't know what else Apple would be doing with it. But anyway, I found a piece of software last week called SoundDesk.
SoundDesk? I've never heard of this.
Okay, same. I was just in a moment of frustration saying, somebody else has got to have built a mixer application for the Mac. And Loud Lab has built SoundDesk. It is on version 5. It is a robust piece of software. It works with my external control surface. It will use Audio Units plugins, but they also have about 15 of their own zero latency plugins, a nice compressor, a decent reverb, a gate, a parametric EQ, a graphic EQ. And so I'm using that to mix this show live right now.
Bless those developers who are just as annoyed at this same problem that they would go this far to make this tool.
And they sell it for $40.
Wow.
I want, and they sent me a free copy because I expressed an interest. I'm like, is this really going to do what I want? They're like, yeah, here's a license. I'm like, I want you to stay in business though. So
let me pay you, please.
Please take my money. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to go buy a license that they won't know about. But yeah, so, I've crafted this workflow that allows me to do this and record live. And sometimes I have to go back to the stem tracks and remix things if there's a problem or whatever. But that's what I do. But that doesn't take me 300 hours. So I'm curious about your workflow, Dallas.
Well, it's interesting. I'm giving a whole talk on this at Podcast Movement this week.
Oh, amazing. I'll be there.
Are you will? Well, come to it's right after the Amy Poehler keynote.
Okay.
10:15 Tuesday.
Okay. All right.
And so I have about 30 minutes to go as fast as possible to explain a workflow that probably takes about 8 hours. So I'm going to give the, 1 minute version.
The pitch of your session.
Pitch.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a lot of strategy involved in creating a show, any piece of content. There's that. A lot of people ask how long, do you ever run out of shows? No, never. It's a sound, there's endless shows about sound. And then as soon as, and every day there's new sounds that are iconic that are being made. So we have a whole way of keeping all that stuff tucked away for when we need it. We make about 22 to 25 episodes per year. So we have to weed down the 500 shows that we have in the back, in the, the background to what is going to tell the best story. What's going to keep people engaged and what's going to give us a narrative arc. Then we go into pre-production where we're doing outlining. We're deciding which guests would be perfect for it, who are good talkers. Then my producer goes off and interviews them and then starts scripting. Sometimes I'm involved with that, depending on if we want a back and forth or if we want me to be just the direct narrator of the show.
Yep.
Am I a character? Am I a narrator? What's my role? Do I have an opinion in it? So we're all evaluating all of these things, and they go off, they script. We go through a whole table read process, multiple rounds of reviews in scripting form. We're aiming for 22 to 25 minutes per episode. Sometimes we go way over that if it's forced, which also this week, actually last week, we just put one of our longest episodes about Hans Zimmer's studio remote control, that it's 45 minutes long, and it took us a year to make. And then it's then all that post-production that goes into it. I'm the absolute opposite of what you do.
Yes.
And I just lay in a bed of editing to make me sound good. I will say that over 8 years, I've gotten better at being a just communicator myself, and it takes a lot of practice to get there. But yeah, it's a long process of mixing, editing, tweaking. So we do multiple table reads. We do many rounds of revisions in audio. Quite a few people involved in it, whether they be freelance. Sometimes there's reporters who tell the story. And yeah, we go back and forth until the deadline looms. And then we put it out, happy every time. But it does feel like it comes down a bit to the wire. We have to be finished with at least 2 to 4 weeks ahead of time, just to then start getting kind of our marketing efforts together. And yeah, then we use Megaphone for our platform.
Yep.
To post, and we have stitched in ads, so we have a whole person doing ads and managing that, and that's how we make a living and how we pay for it. And yeah, we try to make those really compelling, so that's kind of like a different track, and we stitch all of them together in real time. And then we also have automated ads that happen on the show too for a little extra income, and then marketing. So yeah, it's that's the 60-second version of that.
Yeah. It was actually more like 300 second, but it's okay.
Gosh, I gotta get that cut down.
No, it's fascinating. We're here. This is okay. This is okay. I mean, if you need a 60-second version, then that's not it.
I haven't really practiced it that much, so that's a good practice.
Yeah, well, it's always easier to just start with more raw material than you need and whittle it down.
Right.
Yeah. ChatGPT can help you with that.
Sure can.
Yep. In fact, that's one of the things it's best at is distilling down something I've already written. So,
and we use that as needed too.
Yeah, we do too. Yeah, we
don't do it much in the writing process, but we do it
Sure.
in like iterating and like, can we say this in give me 5 different ways of saying this thing that's more clear.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And I think I just had a weird little audio glitch on this end, but Sound Desk recovered and we're rolling, so it's all good. Yeah. Yep. That is fascinating. So you publish an episode 3 to 4 weeks after you've finished recording and creating it. Is that right?
Yeah. And usually we have anywhere from 10 to 20 episodes in production simultaneously.
Wow.
And sometimes we're trying to hit certain milestones, but sometimes one episode may go faster than another, and sometimes one episode might need to slip a little bit. And we're working with multiple freelance writers and producers all over the world. And so it's sometimes we need a little bit more wiggle room on certain episodes.
It's fascinating to me. That's really does how much of your work life is consumed by this show? Because what you just described sounds very much like the obsession of an entrepreneur that would become your full-time focus. But we know from what you've told us that is not the case. So I'm curious, percentage-wise, how much of your time is focused on Defacto sound work that is not 20,000 hertz?
I'd say that now it's probably about a third 20,000 hertz and 2/3 Defacto.
Wow.
Just other kind of personal things. There's a fascinating book out there that I read called Buy Back Your Time, where really the principle of that is every time the first thing someone may need is like an assistant just to like manage their email if you're a really busy creative person.
Sure.
But what was great is like every time you perfect a certain process, you teach that to someone, and then you transfer all that information, and then that frees up that block of time, and then you repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and you show people videos, and I use Loom for that.
Yeah.
And so with enough time and investment in other people, you get to a point where 1, all of your methods have been transferred to someone else, and 2, then they get better at it than you were. And so then they take it into like the stratosphere. That's really what's happened over the past 8 for the podcast and 14 for Defacto, is now my team is better at every single piece of every little nuance and piece than I am at nuance and pieces. But it's been due to a lot of, I spend my time teaching, basically.
Yeah. Okay, I need to, I knew there was a reason that there was going to be a golden nugget from this, and that might be it, because I need to buy back my time too. This is fascinating.
Book. It's Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell.
Yeah, I already have a link to it in the show notes at giggabpodcast.com, folks, so you can go get it too.
It's great. And I've been practicing that for many years before I even read the book, and then the book was like, oh, wow, that's completely crystallizing exactly how many people that I respect work.
Yes. This isn't right. This isn't a new concept, and it's something that as a business owner, you learn that you have to do, but learning other people's techniques for actually doing it and like systematizing it is really the kind of sounds like the key.
There's also a career cycle here that happens too, and I'm starting to get into this third cycle. The first cycle is consumption and learning.
Yep.
Everything you can and just absorbing and practicing and all of those things. Then you kind of get into this world where then your career and you're in the place and you're perfecting and you're getting better and better and better at that craft. But then I've entered this third phase of my life where it's about giving information and giving people opportunity, because it is just as noble to give someone who's in that first or second phase the opportunities that I once had. And so it's me kind of releasing things for other people to have these opportunities and grow in their own careers.
Love it. That's great. Speaking of creating, I hear rumors that you are a musician. You play an instrument. You don't play currently. Tell me, tell us all.
once a musician, always a musician, I feel.
I agree with this. Yes.
The only thing I was good at when I was in 5th, 6th, 7th grade was miraculously a trumpet. I didn't expect. I just thought, ooh, band is cool. These are shiny instruments. Wasn't really great at most subjects, but I played the trumpet and got very good, at least for that age group, very quickly, and excelled all the way through high school, college, where I was first chair in everything that I would audition for. In college, I was playing in first chair in the symphony and the wind ensemble and jazz band until I had a big panic attack in my sophomore year that derailed it all. Like, I thought I was going to be a trumpet performer, and then suffered a panic attack that really just kept spiraling from that point to the point where I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And then
was this like stage fright induced panic attack?
Yes. What happened was like I never had nerves for most of my trumpet playing career until it started getting very serious. So in music school, in many ways, music school is incredible, but in many ways, the best way to ruin your love of music is music school. And in my case, that was the second part, is where it gets so overanalyzed and so much about like, don't frack a note and like everyone's counting on you and all this like perfection, especially in stuffy situations like a symphony, that I started to feel the pressure. It wasn't joy, it was pressure. And when all of the other students and all of the other musicians started to get to that point where they were at my level or above, which was way into college, and I was playing with master's degree students and doctorate degree students, that's when it started to realize, oh, everyone's relying on me. If I'm going to play a solo, I'm commanding this entire symphony hall for this moment, and that pressure's high, and I can kind of ruin it if I frack a note.
Yeah.
And so suffered panic attack, and really just, I felt so, I don't know, sick to my stomach trying to play, and I lost it, and there really wasn't anybody who talked about that, which shockingly, I feel like that should be a part of music school. So I did an episode about this. It's episode 150 called Breathe, where I outline all of the things that happened that led to that panic attack and how I recovered from it. And since then, I've gotten so many musicians reaching out and saying, I've suffered this and no one talks about it. And thank you for having this conversation. Now, since then, I know how to come out of that. And that's where I pivoted in my life, where then I went into live television, mixing for like news and entertainment and sports shows. Back then, like one of the reasons is like I could perform, but I was shaking. So if I was shaking, I could just take my hands off the control and nothing would shake. So I could still transfer that over.
Yep.
And then the other thing that I just was always told is like your best performance will be in a practice room. That's just a really common phrase. And I was like, I don't want my best performance to be in a practice room. I want to perfect it and it stays perfected. And then eventually I found post-production. And so it feels very much like a lineage of where I was going to go. I also feel like
this checks out now. Yeah.
Conducting and mixing are very similar. And so I also wanted to be a conductor. And so I feel like I am a conductor as a mixer.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Now I understand why 300 hours of production to make an episode of 20,000 Hertz. There's a little bit of
composition.
It's a composition. Yeah. Well, you're in control of the whole process.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've always said, of course, that level of stage fright is not good and like unhealthy, obviously. No stage fright, I think, is also not necessarily unhealthy, but an indicator that maybe, for me personally, that I'm in the wrong scenario. If I don't have a little bit of nerves going on stage, if I don't care about the quality of the performance that I'm about to give, I want to know why. And I've talked on this show about how I've, found myself in bands that I didn't enjoy playing with and would organize things so that there was no concern going on stage. It's like, wait, I don't want to do this anymore with this particular scenario. I want to find a scenario that does give me a little bit of, that I care. That back to respecting the audience.
There is a big difference between unhealthy stage fright and what would be the right word for it? Just like healthy nerves.
I think it's healthy nerves. Butterfly. Yeah.
Before I do interviews, I still get nervous. 5 minutes before we started talking, I started to go, whoa, okay, it's getting a little, like, I'm starting to feel those butterflies.
Same.
But there's a there's a difference between terror and excitement.
Correct.
And these I can identify as, I'm excited to have this conversation with a guest or with you, versus the weight of the world of all of these people are all coming down on me to play this very stuffy excerpt perfectly. And I didn't enjoy it. I certainly love symphonies now, but it took me about a decade to even be able to come back to it, and really even understanding the psychology of how symphony players do what they do before I could really come back to it and really enjoy it for what it is.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you went through that. I'm glad that you found a path from that led to everything else and all of this.
There's a good lesson in that too. Had I not had that panic attack, I would not have started what I believe is one of the most prolific sound design companies in the world, and I certainly wouldn't have started a podcast that has affected hundreds of thousands of people in a positive way. So it's a good reminder that hardship and things that feel like obstacles that you can't get through are the way. And there's a great book about that. The Obstacle is the Way. And for me, that obstacle of panic attacks, that pivot, that thing I didn't know what I was going to do the next day or the next year or the next 5 years, is what transformed my life to be able to do something that was very meaningful. So you may not know where it's going, but that's part of living.
Yeah. To bring Steve Jobs up again, he was fond of saying that the dots. It only makes sense when you connect the dots in reverse. You don't
absolutely.
You don't really get to know where you're going. It's just a series of accidents and course corrections and all of those things that looks fine when you look back with some hindsight. Yeah.
Some of the most impactful negative experience have turned into incredibly positive ones.
Amazing. Well, that's good. I'm glad. Have you had any interest in, or have you played any instrument, the trumpet or anything else since then, or is that just a part that you've kind of left behind?
I feel like in a very roundabout way, I feel like I'm using the same part of my brain. I feel like I'm a composer. So I would say, while it would be amazing to go perform in like a community band and get those feelings again, or in, like a Earth, Wind and Fire, like cover band, which would be a blast. I do get to flex all of those muscles with my team in the creation and strategy of sonic branding or very high impactful sound design. So I would say that while not technically I'm doing that, I feel very much like I'm flexing those exact same creative muscles repeatedly on a daily basis. So I'm very fulfilled as a musician, even though I might not be playing that instrument.
Yep. No, I equate doing a podcast, even before I started doing a podcast about music, just doing the tech podcast, it felt like going on stage and performing, and, you have an agenda, and that's like a set list. And sometimes you make an audible call to change the set list, and it's all very much the same muscles for me too. I mean, now
we're playing jazz. We're working off of each other. We're singing our notes. We're making something that people want to hear. I'm feeling
hopefully
the same feelings as what I did when I performed, but it's even more fun.
Yes. Yeah. The right podcast episode is a jam session. I've always said that, where it's just it's improvisation together with a structure, loose or tight as it might be.
I love this part of my brain.
Same. Yeah. Same. I was at South by Southwest a week and a half ago, and I saw a movie about a piece of technology that I had not known it even existed. And then the story about it was fascinating. And when I knew that you and I were going to have this conversation, I thought, Dallas might be interested in this too. Have you ever heard of this thing called the Resynator with a Y, Resynator?
I saw that in the show outline, and I have no idea what it is.
Great. I didn't either until I sat down to watch this movie. I mean, I knew it was a movie about, when South by Southwest, South by is, well, it used to be a bunch of different festivals that happened together. They sent out a note to everybody on the press list this year and said, stop calling them separate festivals. We stopped that 6 years ago. So it is one festival with many different tracks. And so the film track has lots of different types of films. There's headliner films, there's documentary films. And even amongst those, there are different categories. And there's one category that I look for first, and that is a category that they call 24 beats per second, which is their clever way of saying it's a film about something related to music. A lot of these are documentaries about bands or musicians or, something in the music world. This one, in the 24 beats per second category, was about what arguably might be the first electronic synthesizer. And yeah, so I will, but the movie is about more than that, it turns out. And it was fantastic. I never expected to be in tears for half of a movie about a synthesizer, but I certainly was. The synthesizer itself was this fascinating thing, built in 1983 or earlier by a guy named Don Tavel. And when we think of synthesizers, I often think of something with a, piano-like keyboard attached to it. This was not that. This was a 3U rack-mounted design, and it took an analog input, sensed the note from whatever you plugged into it. It could be a guitar, it could be a vocal microphone, it could be anything, and then in real time, in 1983, it would essentially throw away the rest of the signal after it sensed the note that was being played, and then had this synthesizer that you could adjust the parameters of to make it sound like whatever you wanted it to sound like. And this guy designed it. He worked with an engineer to really pull it together. They actually showed it off at NAMM way back then. But only about 5 or 6 of them were ever made. The project never really got off the ground. And Don passed away 10 weeks after his daughter was born. Yeah. So she was raised by someone else that she knows as dad and her mother, right? But she knew of her biological father, but only through stories from the family. There were clearly some things that were not told, but she knew about this Resynator and how he had invented this, and everybody that saw it was blown away. And throughout the movie, they had a lot of these people talking about this. Peter Gabriel, John Anderson, Paul McCartney, the list goes on and on of all the people that knew about this thing and had placed orders for it. I think Gabriel might have been one of the only people that ever actually got his hands on one of these 5 units. But Alison Tavel, who is his daughter and directed and created this movie, knew that her grandmother had one of these Resynators in her attic. And so this movie was created for her to learn who her father was and to get to know her father. And but they got this thing, and she brought it to the engineer that he had worked with decades prior, and they plugged it in. He says, okay, it's working about 60% of the way it was. And they got it to a point where it worked. And then they brought it to all these musicians, and watching a guitar player play this thing, I was shocked at how closely it tracked. There was no there was no delay on this. 1983. We have trouble with this today. It's incredible. Yeah. So I highly recommend. I'm movies that premiere at South by Southwest often are looking for distribution. I believe this one has distribution. If it doesn't already, it will, but I'm pretty sure it already does. So I think we will see it out sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. Keep an eye out for it, folks, and you, Dallas, too. It's fascinating.
These are the exact types of story that I try to tell with 20,000 Hertz. It's every so often, you won't see it coming. You won't even see it coming in the first half, but you will be sideswiped emotionally out of nowhere, and it's entirely intentional because sound and music is something that's so deep. And if we're not giving those other aspects, I feel like we're not doing a service to the medium itself. So, gosh, I'm looking this up, and everything I'm reading, I was like, yes, I want to watch this. This sounds incredible.
You absolutely. I knew it was oh, man. I want to find a way to talk about this on Gig Gab was like, oh wait, I have accidentally created the perfect venue for this.
That's what we're always trying to do. Like every time we're evaluating stories, this is why we have 3, 4, 500 in the background, is because we're like, how can we tell this story from a human perspective? But the fact that that it was the daughter trying to uncover her father's work and learning about him,
yes,
is like that's the magic.
That was the magic, and obviously that's where the emotions and the tears and all that came from. Don't get me wrong, I was shocked when watching that guitar player play it. My first thought, I blurted out, I said, wow, that thing tracks really well. This movie, I actually watched a screener of it at home because it was premiering before I left for South by Southwest. So they sent me a screener to watch at home. And so I wasn't in a theater when I blurted this out. But you know, I was like, wow, that thing tracks so well. And then the guitar player, and then my second thought was, did they adjust, you know, because with the magic of filmmaking, you can make it look like it tracks really well, right? And before that thought even sort of finished formalizing in my head, the guitar player said, "This is amazing how well this tracks." I was like, okay, great. This was legitimate. Yeah.
That is so cool.
It's so cool. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
It is on my list.
Yes, absolutely. I'll if I get word as to when it's coming out or whatever, I'll shoot you a note, make sure you know, because yeah, you would love this. Yeah.
That's cool.
I think. Yeah. So
the wheels are already turning. I already want to get my team on this, learn more about it, maybe get a screener. This seems like a perfect topic for our show.
It does. I would agree 100% with this. Yeah. It's fascinating. Really good stuff. Well, maybe I'll happily put you in touch with them, and maybe you can
that. Yeah,
create an episode.
I'd love to get. Yeah, this is like a great pitch. Like this is exactly the stuff that we're always looking for. Uncovering incredible human stories about a sound thing. Yep.
It's crazy. I got to do another fun sound thing that, it's awesome being an audio nerd, as you know, and it's terrible being an audio nerd, as I'm sure you know.
Blessing and a curse.
It's a blessing and a curse. I was invited to a listening party for Nick Cave's album that's coming out in August, called Wild God, and it happened at the Central Presbyterian Church in Austin.
Oh.
Yeah, which is an amazing room. I've seen bands play there. It is a South by venue often. And this was just in the afternoon. There were maybe 20 of us there. And it's the perfect album to listen to in a stone, huge church.
Oh, I was just there. Something else. How about
there you go.
Another conference.
Yep. Unfortunately, they played it through the system. This is not the unfortunate part. They played it through the system that was being used for bands all week. So they already had a sound system with line arrays and all the right things set up. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate part was they played it from a laptop, and they clearly had taken the volume of this MacBook Pro. They were using just the built-in DAC in the MacBook Pro with its line out, and they had the volume on the MacBook Pro cranked as high as it would go. Oh no. Yes. So I got to hear this Nick Cave album that sort of sounded like it was maybe produced by the Black Keys. Like, it was this like distorted on the top end, oddly compressed. Ugh. And if I could have snuck over and just, taken it down to 70% without someone getting mad at me and wondering what I was doing. I mean, this album was being protected. If I had gone over to this laptop, they would have thought that I was trying to steal a copy of the record because it's not out yet and all of this stuff. Like so I sat there and suffered through it. And the album is great, but the sound was just like.
Well, Apple has some pretty extreme parameters with what they're having to do with small speakers and outputs.
Yeah.
And so they have to do some very thoughtful, funny business, especially when it comes to those top few notches of volume.
Yep.
And so just simply turning it down maybe 5 notches and then just turning up the PA.
And just, increasing the gain on the PA.
Yeah.
Yep. I know. So let that be a lesson to all of us, because especially folks that are doing live sound, invariably you're going to plug in a phone or a laptop with its built-in DAC into your system. Don't crank it. like Dallas just said, come down to like 60, 70%. There's not going to be, you're still going to have plenty of signal to noise. The SNR is going to be fine in the line. Just let it, don't crank it. It's going to be better.
But did it sound good in that kind of reverberant space?
It did. Yeah. The only thing that was really problematic was like the cymbals that were shimmering and stuff were definitely distorted.
I saw bluegrass in an opera house one time, and I was like, this is not the right place. It's too reverberant. It was all just a wash, and these people are just like, and it's just too like specific.
Yes.
So the venue and the acoustics are things that have to be paired well, or you can have a not so great experience.
This was paired very well for this specific album. There were some songs, even with the sound being, a little distorted on the top end, was still fantastic.
That's good. So ambient, classical, things like that would be real nice.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I saw Edie Brickell in that venue, and that was like, for a rock band, that was acceptable. Not this year, but in years past. But like, I think perhaps the best thing that I saw there in terms of a rock act at South by was Amanda Palmer with a piano. It was just her, no band, and that was because it's reverberant, and it just the room sort of has its own personality.
I've never been like told by friends more about a conference to go to than South by Southwest, and it's probably been 15 years, and I have not gone one time. So I should probably go sometime.
Go. Yep.
I always think it's going to be like a zoo and so packed that it's not fun.
So the first two things that you said there are true, but the packed zoo, but also very manageable, because not unless you're trying to go to the most popular event of an evening or a day.
I'm a nerd. I don't do that.
Right. It's like most of what I did was it was half full venues and things like that. It's totally fine. I lived in Austin for 6 years, and I mentioned this on the last episode, but there's this vibe in Austin amongst the locals that you avoid South by Southwest. You don't go because it's too packed and it's, too popular and overstated and all of those things. And I didn't wind up going to South by Southwest until after we had moved from Austin. And after I went, even just the first day, I called my wife and was like, we're idiots. We bought in. We used to live 20 minutes from here, and now I fly here and I get a hotel room. This is ridiculous. Yep. We may still live in Austin if we had been going to South by Southwest every year. Like, we might not have left. It is a great town. I love it there. Yeah. So, any other stories you have to tell, or anything you want to share here?
Oh, we have tons.
Great.
As far as in the music world, right when I started Defacto Sound, I had a studio, and somehow Ludacris's manager reached out via email and was like, Ludacris is going to be in town playing this big, arena, and he needs to record 2 episodes of a BET show where he's narrating it.
Yeah.
And I was like, this doesn't even seem real, but I'm going to go with it. And so I was like, sure. And they're like, can you do it on a Saturday? He's going to fly in from Mexico with his girlfriend, now wife, and bodyguard. And if you can make yourself available on a Saturday. And I did. And so he, I still, even going right up to this point, I didn't think it was going to really happen, but I had everything set up, working with the production company. Ludacris shows up. I have an assistant with me. So it's just like the whole facility shut down. It's me and an assistant.
Sure.
Ludacris, his wife, bodyguard come in, kind of first things first, kind of checking me out, making sure I'm not a lunatic. And, he's still kind of a little standoffish, but we kind of get into it and, being normal. Prior to this point, I've worked with celebrities before.
Yes.
But yeah, he comes in, super pro. I think that I was kind of also expecting that the stage presence and the content of what he performs about would be like his persona as somebody who worked. And no, he got in, worked, very professional, very serious about his work. We took a break, had lunch together. His bodyguard was just watching Animal Planet, like having a ball, watching giraffes. And it was it was the first time I had worked with a celebrity very intimately, where it made me realize that how much like they are actual artists and performers. I think that there's a confusing thing between like what this person puts out as their public persona is who they are as a person, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Who I am on my little sound podcast is a performance, caricature almost in that specific realm of what I am as a husband or a father.
Yeah.
Or what I do with my normal life. So
I
got taught this amazing
we're on
lesson.
stage. Yeah.
Yeah. Of just, professionalism and, he's a superstar and I'm just somebody recording, but the level of respect that he showed was incredible. And it was just neat to kind of see that behind the scenes. Prior to this, I also worked in television out in LA for a national show called Good Day Live, which was kind of like a Regis and Kelly thing. And I was an A2, which an A2 is not the person at the board, but the person who's miking up the actual celebrities. And so there were so many celebrities that I met. Magic Johnson and like David Spade. I remember when somebody, especially who worked on Saturday Night Live, somebody just walks up to you with a microphone, like he just pulled his entire shirt up and just knew exactly the whole runaround, because it's like I'm the person that has to like go and wire people up.
Actors know and are used to it, and they're totally fine with it. Yes, that's right.
What I learned in that is like, so working with a lot of celebrities, they're nervous too. Like they're totally normal people. They're just not on all the time. And just the level of respect when working with people who are fairly famous was neat, because like we're all in it together for the most part. Yes. Not to say that there weren't a few people that would come through and be a little bit of like okay, you're living your high life right now. Yeah. But we get through it. So that was fun, like a fun way of like understanding how celebrities think. And
yes,
that they're normal people. And so I've had a few of those. Nowadays, I don't really work with celebrities so much. Mainly what my team and I do now are just tons of trailers and ads. And so we're working with the biggest brands in the world, with the biggest agencies and the biggest, we mix like 800 to 1,200 Netflix trailers a year.
Oh my gosh.
So
we're
working much more with like corporate entities for their thing. So celebrities in slightly different ways, where we're all trying to like keep up appearances. But yeah, it's a very interesting life that I live. And so I basically jump between making ads and trailers and documentaries and things like that to telling people how amazing sound is. And I enjoy both of them in their own ways.
A charmed life, my friend. That's awesome.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Not an accidentally charmed life, mind you. I understand that you've held the reins and driven it this way. That's amazing.
I mean, awesome. some of it has to do with the pragmatism of making a living and,
yes.
having to go into paths that do pay real dollars in order to pay real dollars to other human beings for them to be able to put food on their table and have a life for themselves too.
Yeah.
So there is that aspect of art versus commerce. And so the commerce aspect is also something I think a lot about, just as a business brain. Most of what I consume are like business books, even though most of what I communicate is sound.
I don't know if you did this intentionally, but I literally do. The third podcast that I do is called Business Brain. So
no way.
Yeah.
Look at that. This was like perfect.
I know. Yeah. And there have been moments as we've been recording this episode that I thought, we could put this out as a Business Brain episode. Like there's enough crossover, but musicians are often, perhaps more common than not, self-employed,
right.
At least for that part of their lives. Right. So
any freelancer or musician or anyone who has to just kind of live gig to gig.
Yeah.
Have to kind of naturally learn business tactics.
Well,
yeah.
A lot of them don't, which is unfortunate. Part of what we do on this show is addressing some of that and kind of showing people that, like you just said, the blending of art and commerce is, well, first of all, it's okay. And then secondly, you can make it okay for yourself by finding a path that serves you in a way that allows you to put dollars in your pocket and food on the table and dollars in the pockets of the people who you employ, but also serves the artist in you. And there are paths to making that. Like you don't have to starve to be a legitimate artist.
And I know a lot of composers who do it for a living.
Yeah.
I know a lot of musicians who do it for a living. I know a lot of hobbyists who are some of the best musicians, better than professionals in some regard. And there's a lot of grass is greener on the other side. aspect of it. But when I think about music, music is something that's like human language. It's something that speaks in a deep way. And there's a difference between it being your job and being your joy. If you can make both of them, that's awesome. But it's perfectly okay to make a living in a completely different way and perform music for pure joy's sake. That's what the entire history of music has been.
Yes.
For all of human history has been music as a joyful act that people, farmers will farm and then they will sing and play, together as a family.
Yep.
Even doing shows about how the way that like families before TV, before radio, they would have, instruments in their house and they'd play together. And so I think that because of social and because of, how much our little human brains are taking in, like in this generation, it's easy to get a lot of things confused. But music is a pure and joyful thing, and it doesn't have to be mixed with the commerce side. Like,
no, it doesn't have to be.
I'd prefer to just play the piano with my girls and not make it a whole, like, we need to put this on TikTok.
Right. So you do play piano at home privately these days sometimes?
Yeah, we have a piano.
Awesome.
The piano is the instrument that I wish I always had played in the past.
Yep.
Because there's so many things that can blossom out of that. So I still will tinker around. Not very good at it, which I shouldn't say that. I know musicians shouldn't say that about themselves. But it is a real joy to see my kids play the piano very, very well and joyfully.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, I think that's a perfect place to at least end this episode. I would love to have you come back someday and we'll tell more stories and dig into more of this stuff.
There's a lot more, so I'm down.
I know.
This is so fun.
Amazing. Great. I'm glad. For those of you, I alluded to this at the beginning of the episode, but however long this episode is, that plus 5 minutes is the length of time that Dallas and I have known each other. So this really was us getting to know each other here, and I'm glad we were able to do it this way. So
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice meeting somebody that you don't know and realize how much you have in common.
Yeah.
It's like faith in humanity.
Yes. Yes.
We don't have to look at the bad in the world. Look at the good in the world.
I always say, the bad stuff's going to get in when it shows up. The bad stuff's going to get in no matter what. Like it just has its way. The good stuff, that's the thing we got to make sure we leave the door open for, because that you can close out. And so I love that we left the door open for this. And this is
a great 6 months to just let the joy in and just choose joy.
Choose joy.
Choose happiness.
I like it. Dallas, before we go, would you tell people where they can find you, my friend?
The number one place to find me is right here in your podcast player where you're listening. Type in 20,000 Hertz, all spelled out without any numbers. So TWE, etc. And sometimes it'll just pop up when you put TWE in.
Yeah.
It's a purple swirly icon. Go in there, follow or subscribe. And every show is completely evergreen. And what evergreen means is that they can all be consumed at any point in time, history, future, and it'll still be relevant. And they generally do not cross over with each other. So you don't need to start anywhere. You can start at the beginning, you can start at the end, you can literally scroll and click anything. There's very few two-parters in there, and when there are, it's very clear. So look at something, dive in wherever you want, and when you listen to one episode, you haven't gotten the full picture. There's a whole arc that's kind of like, that's happening in emotion. Some are joyful, some are sad, some are all over the place. But just dive in. It's a lot of fun.
I can attest to this, folks. 20,000 Hertz is a show that I love to listen to. Believe it or not, I like to listen to it when I'm in the sauna, believe it or not. So,
nice. Yeah. A lot of people will say that they like save this show for their like best critical, calm listening. And that's a great, and also another thing that people say a lot is just that they listen with their kids. And that's really meaningful too. It's a very clean show.
Cool. Yeah.
We can cover kind of heavy topics, but I'm never cursing. We're never kind of like doing anything I wouldn't want my own kids to hear.
Yep. That's great. That's awesome. Thank you for hanging out with me for the last hour. Thank you for hanging out with all of us for the last hour, Dallas, and to all of you. Thank you for spending your time. Send in your feedback for us at feedback@giggabpodcast.com. And one thing we like to say on this show is always be performing. Thanks again, Dallas. This was amazing.
So fun.
We'll see you next week, folks.
nice.